Good. Well, welcome everybody to the Department of Ethnic Studies, to the Barbara Christian Conference Room, named after the extraordinary scholar, teacher, mentor, Black feminist extraordinaire, Barbara Christian. My name is Keith Feldman. I'm chair in the Department of Ethnic Studies and a collaborator with Victoria Robinson in American Cultures and Jason Muniz in the History and Social Sciences project. Together, we've been facilitating this project called the High School Ethnic Studies Initiative, or HSESI. And among the many activities that we've been hosting have been scholar series conversations, where we're bringing in content experts to be able to speak to key areas for the development of ethnic studies curriculum at this critical juncture, especially for our K-12 educators. So we have a couple more coming up that I just want to preview for you before we get started today. So March 26th, we're hosting a speaker panel to talk about how we create healing spaces in response to controversial topics. Please come out for that. And on April 2nd, we have another Scholar Series event called How Can Districts and Schools Successfully Implement Ethnic Studies Courses? Key events. We're also doing all we can to archive and make these events available beyond our live and in-person experience. So they live on the HSESI website, which is being hosted through the American Culture Center. So today we have an amazing panel that's answering the question, how do we teach Pacific Island Matters in high school ethnic studies curriculum? And I'm really pleased to invite Angel Halafihi to kick us off.
Hi, y'all. Ramadan Kareem, or blessed Ramadan to those who observe. It's also Hawaiian Language Month. It's also Chamorro History Month. That's Chamorro. And it's also Women's History Month, so it's an honor to be here with you all today at this time, in this place, talking about the things that we will be talking about. And yeah, I'm so excited to be able to open up for what will be such an amazing panel with a profound group of waymakers in our Pacific Island and ethnic studies communities. Thank you, Keith Feldman and Victoria Robinson, for organizing us in the way that you have. I also want to thank the American Cultures teams for organizing Culture Conversation series as a space for our local educators. Thank you, Estella Owoimaha-Church and Joem for taking the time to help us have this conversation. And also thank you to our young people, Tina and Kahel, for really helping us shape today and what the conversation will be. Yeah, my name is Angel Halafihi. I use she, her pronouns. Currently, I am one of two assistant directors of the Asian Pacific American Student Development Office, or PASD, where my primary role there is to oversee the Pacific Islander Initiative. So the Pacific Islander Initiative is a student-run initiative. It was created formally in 2019 and is rooted in student activism. It was created by students who really just wanted to see more and better for their communities on this campus, for themselves, but also for future generations to come. And yeah, I think it's so special to have our students here too. So just a special shout out to you all for being here today and for helping us lead today's event. And thinking about this conversation today and some of what I felt was important and some of what I heard from our speakers in our prep meeting and our prep call about what this meant to them and to us, and thinking about how this time is of great grief. I wanted to offer to this space some of the thinking and reflections of a recent art piece that I did for Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, or EPIC, and what I worked actually with Estella on a few months ago to help get our PI communities moving and connected around attacks on ethnic studies that were happening, where educators were being sued for teaching and defending ethnic studies and an ethnic studies curriculum that included Palestinian people. And so this was a piece that was born to support advocacy efforts in defense of ethnic studies. And so to talk a little bit about it, and Estella, feel free to jump in, as Estella was, this is what I hope reflects some of what Estella's vision was. I just draw pictures, y'all. So
That's good.
You
do great pictures.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks, y'all. In the background, it's a little hard to see, but maybe I'll pass it around so you can look a little bit more closely as we get started. Is a ngatu, or a traditional mat in the background, where it's marked with motifs storied by hand on a fine mat, using materials that are sourced from the land and the water. It's pretty common in Pacific Islander cultures. In the background is a globe, and intentionally it has the Pacific Ocean at its core. And this is because it was intended to help mobilize our Pacific Islander communities, and also wanting to cite the great Teresa Siagatonu, another great, about how so often the globe actually cuts the Pacific Islands or the Pacific Ocean in half. And so here we wanted to just make sure that it was whole, invisible, and centered in that way. The silhouettes that you see are actually silhouettes of protesters from the TWLF 1969 movement. And so how special it is to have this conversation today on this campus, right? Home of those strikes. And then the watermelon, as you all may know, is a symbol of Palestinian resistance. And so, yeah, I'll pass it actually along while I finish my reflections. But yeah, this past November, APEC, or the Asian Pacific Economic Corporation, held their summit in San Francisco. And if you don't know, or if you're not familiar with APEC, I really recommend that you look into the work that they do. In response to the summit, our communities actually held a counter summit, and one at San Francisco State University. And one thing I will hold with me for a long time is something that Dr. Konipate Rokolekutu said, where he reminded us about the Pacific Islander value of reciprocity, and knowing that we don't do something for another person or for another community because we expect that in return, or because we expect the same actions in return, but actually we show up for each other because we are responsible for one another. And so to tie it all back to today's event, I want to ground us by inviting us to reckon with and grapple with the long-standing questions around the whys of ethnic studies, the hows of solidarity, and how we are all implicated in each other's struggles, the wins of our collective liberation, understanding that our struggles are bound together. And so with that, with that, I'll go ahead and get us started with the overview of our time together. After I introduce our moderators, they'll spend a few moments introducing themselves and saying a little bit more about who they are, who they come from. They'll introduce our speakers for the day, and then we'll proceed with our cluster conversation and Q&A. On your way out, we also invite you to take a cupcake and cupcake to go. Does that sound okay, y'all? Yes. Okay. Cool. So I've had the pleasure of knowing Kahel for the last 2.5 years and Female over the last 1.5 years. They are both currently interns for the Pacific Islander Initiative. There we go. So while I am technically their supervisor, they are really my bosses. They drive the show, but I think more than that, it's rooted in the understanding of how critical their voices are as young people in shaping our work as a student-run program. And how important it is that we not only listen to their questions today, but that we also listen and trust their answers too, as it's their voices of which are central in shaping our futures. In this, like QEP Newton's knowing of the revolution has always been in the hands of the young, and that the young always inherit the revolution. How special it is that we're also in the Bay Area having this conversation. So thank you, Fiona and Kahel, for giving me the pleasure of working with you all and for so graciously saying yes to the request. /voluntold request to shape today's conversation by being our moderators. I'll read your bios and then I'll ask you to come up here and introduce yourself, and also introduce who your name is, and then I'll let you do your name. Yeah. So Fiona Tuitupou is a senior majoring in ethnic studies. Growing up, her parents instilled the values of community and activism. This and her experiences in life have incentivized her passion for advocacy and ethnic studies, as well as love for the community is the practices in which she wishes to ground her future work in. She grew up in LA, which sparked her interest and shaped her identity. Good enough, Tina? And Kyle, Zedekiah, has roots in the Marshall Islands in Orange County, and is a third year at Cal, planning to major in ethnic studies. So happy to.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having us. My name is Kahel Zedekiah. Like Angel said, I'm from Orange County and I have roots stemming back to the Marshall Islands. Third year, this is my first year in the Ethnic Studies program, and so far I'm liking some of what it has to offer, but there's work, and everything we have to do, but yeah, that's me.
Hello, my name is Tuitupou, and my ancestors come from the villages of Nukunuku, Kolomatua, and Basti. Sorry, I couldn't remember. My parents are gonna scold me for that, but and yeah, I'm a senior majoring in ethnic studies, and I use she/her pronouns, and I'm just grateful to be in this space today. But yeah. Okay, well, we're gonna read the bios of our panelists, but I'll start it off by introducing Estella. Estella is the first generation of her family born on Tonga land. While identifying as an Angelino, deeply connected to the lands that raised her, Estella's roots burrow deep beyond the asphalt of South Central LA. Her maternal grandparents are from the villages of Satufia, Pasifika, and Salelelua of Bolu, Samoa. Her paternal parents are from Calabar, Cross River, Nigeria. She transitions into the role of executive director at Empowering Pacific Islander Communities, EPIC, or also known as EPIC, post nearly 2 decades of service as an educator. Estella was the first Samoan to be named a finalist for the Global Teacher Prize in 2018 and awarded California Theater Teacher of 2020. As a Black Pacific Islander, mother to a Black PI child, and the elder sister of 2 Black PI young men, she holds dear her responsibility to serve generations of past, present, and future. So long as she is capable, Estella will advocate for all of those who look like her, step out as a co-conspirator for others in the margins, and forge clear paths for young people where there once were none.
And our second panelist is Andrew Vai. He's a Samoan and Tokelauan educator from San Francisco, California. He holds a master's degree in ethnic studies from San Francisco State University, where his thesis focused on the experiences of Pacific Islander men in community college. Drew is currently a faculty in the ethnic studies department at Chabot College, where he teaches first course focused on Pacific Islanders Ethnic Studies 6. When he's not teaching, he is supporting students as an advisor working alongside the Nations Unite learning community at Chabot. Beyond realms of academia, Drew is an established writer who has taught and performed poetry across the world. Much of his work centers on being Pacific Islander and growing up in San Francisco. None of this is possible without community. Okay, so our first question for y'all is, who are Pacific Islanders and who does that term apply to?
Well, I mean, if we want to do like geography, right? You know what I'm saying? Like the Pacific is like broken into like 3 sections, right? Melanesia, Micronesia, and Polynesia, and within the experience of within my lived experience in the United States and specifically San Francisco, it's been predominantly like a Polynesian perspective. So a heavy representation of Tongan, Samoan, and Hawaiian communities. But through lived experiences and maneuvering through higher ed, we're starting to recognize that we exist, or other communities from the different sections of the Pacific are being recognized as well. So our brothers and sisters and community folks from multiple places in Melanesia and Micronesia as well. It's kind of hard for me to kind of say and name like what those and who are those communities, because I don't come from those communities. But I do say that I can say that they are here, and they are very aware or they're here, and I'm gonna pass it to Stella to help me out. You know what I'm saying?
Something that comes to mind, and thank you both for introducing yourselves, who your names are, and your villages, and also for us. And when Angel was sharing her reflections earlier, Teresa, an amazing poet and thought leader in our community from the Bay, she has this piece called Atlas. And in that piece, she has a line, and I'm gonna paraphrase. She says, "You ask me where I'm from, and I will tell you I'm from the water, from the ocean." And so when Angel mentioned that the Pacific is centered in that piece, it immediately reminded me of Teresa's poem Atlas. Look that piece up. I love starting the school year with that piece in my freshman English courses. And I still to this day cannot listen to that piece without sobbing, because she talks about her growing up in diaspora, being from here in the Bay, and also being connected to the ocean, connected to her homelands. And it resonates so deeply, it pierces every time I hear it, because I am so South Central. Like I am so an Angelino girl, but there is so much more that I bring into the space when Angel did not misspeak when she said, say, who is your name? And it's common across our islands for us to introduce ourselves as who our name, who our people are, who we come from, as opposed to where we come from. And so my full name, Estella Owoimaha-Church, Owoimaha-Church, is a mouthful, and it took me a long time to be proud of it, to say it fully, and to own it. Every piece of that name points to a different part of an island, to a different land that made it possible for me to exist. I will add to what my brother Drew has said, something that I have, I don't know if I've taken it upon myself or has just been my lived experience, but making sure to center those who are most marginalized within Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities, because often when you think PI, you see Samoan faces, you see Tongan faces, you see Hawaiian faces. You think celebrities, we can name The Rock and Momoa, maybe Ali Kravalo, or most folks might just say Moana. And we forget all about Melanesia and Micronesia. And there's some, I name it as there's some anti-Blackness there, right? Like Melanesia, melanin. These are the Black islands of the Pacific that are often left out of the narrative. And it's important as folks who are regularly centered that we make note of that. I also want to note that as Pasifika folks, our identities are very much geopolitical and are 100% have been out of our control. We did not come up with any of those terms or names. We are over 25,000 islands across the largest ocean on our planet, and folks would like to just label us, like throw some Aloha t-shirts up in there, some Musubi, and all good, done. And there's so much more to who we are, each of our customs, cultures, so many similarities, sure, run deep throughout our islands, but each culture is significant and unique and of its own, and each story deserves to be heard. And when we get lumped into AAPI, lumping all Asian folks together is already a disservice to our siblings and our relatives who identify as Asian American, whether you're Southeast Asian, East Asian, a refugee, and then to add Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander to that umbrella term only further marginalize and makes more invisible our community. More than 56% of our community that is here in diaspora identify as mixed race. And the latest census information shows that some of our fast and growing communities are our Melanesian and Micronesian communities here in the US, with one of our largest Micronesian populations being in Arkansas. And every time I say it and hear it, I'm still, what? Arkansas? Why? But yes, our people are in Arkansas, and we are hella deep in Arkansas, and still one of the fastest growing populations in the Pacific Northwest. And so, yeah, I guess to who we are, that's a summary of PI folks in diaspora.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. We wanted to ask y'all more about the term AAPI and what y'all see for the future of that term, and if it has any more space now, considering like all the damage it has done and how much it has missed, considering the PI.
Appreciate the way you worded that. I will say, so I was a labor organizer, a unionist for 20 years, and there is definitely political power in a term like AAPI, because there's power in numbers with any political movement, and any social movement. There's definitely power in numbers. However, I should say, it is about time, or I feel it's about time, it feels right, with generations. Actually, I think you two are a perfect example. I did not have access to Pasifika studies or PI studies as an ethnic studies major undergrad. But Fine, if I'm not wrong, you took a class with Drew. And Drew is teaching one of the first PI courses at Chabot. And we now have Fine graduating with a degree in ethnic studies. What you do with that, I don't know, but it's gonna be brilliant. Right, and so now is the time. It is the time, right? You have someone like Angel on this campus who is a brilliant organizer, and the PI initiative is what it is because of her love, sweat, labor into that program. And so now it feels apt. It feels just about time for us to make space for Pasifika studies, for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander studies to stand on its own. But what that is going to take is for folks who have privilege, power, space, resource to use what they have in order to center the most marginalized. And in this case, what we're talking about is Pasifika communities. To use the resource that is available to make space for PI initiatives to exist on college campuses, to make space for Nesian clubs to exist on college campuses, to make space for introductory PI study courses to exist on our campuses. It's time, right? And so I guess it's a yes and. I'm always gonna stand in solidarity with my folks. And it is time for us to have our own spaces that can stand on their own.
It's so crazy because that's like the subject that that's the lesson I'm gonna teach next week. You know what I mean? So from my understanding, I think the 1960 census is like the first census where folks get to choose their own identities for the most part. And, there's a lot of things that are happening at the height of there's a lot of things going on in the 1960s, right? And one of the things that's happening, right? SF State, Cal, Berkeley, right? This is Fight for Ethnic Studies, and folks that are part of the Third World Liberation Front, right? Asian communities are combating against the term Orientalism, right? They're trying to fight against that, and so the significance of Asian American, the label Asian American, is in solidarity to combat this is who we are, right? This is who we are as people that exist within the diaspora. And this is our claim, right? To own our identity, right, within the diaspora. And I think probably in the mid 70s, to kind of carry that message, right, and continue that message of solidarity. Pacific Islanders are pulled into that term, right, where there is, right, it's really important, right, to acknowledge the origin of the name, and it was about representation and making people feel seen. But the ironic part about it is that's your intentions, but then the reality is when you go into those spaces, do you feel seen, right? And I can recall being super excited as a kid, going to these AAPI spaces, feeling oh, this is where I'm gonna learn about myself. This is where I'm gonna see other Pacific Islander people, and it's dominated by East Asian communities. You know what I'm saying? There's no knock against that, because I was open enough to be able to be hey, I don't see myself in these spaces, but let me learn from these communities that are heavily represented. But then as you try to be optimistic about it, right, and then you try to make room for yourself in these spaces, you realize that it's hard for people to make room for you. It's hard for them to make room for you when they don't know where you're coming from. You know what I'm saying? So it's really important to have the numbers to back it up. And I think, especially in the work that I do now with Asians Unite, we are a program that's funded, that is an AAPI funded program, right? Where I understand the dynamics of I have to navigate within the AAPI term, because I understand that these are still the labels that are used within the institutions and systems that give my community the possibility to grow, right? Give them the resources to do the things that we're doing at Chabot College, which is create a learning community focused on Pacific Islanders. I have to navigate the AAPI world to gain access for my community. But and that's why it's so important that we sit on this panel, that we sit in these positions as director, as professor, to continually advocate for that. So that's like kind of like my active job right now. So I'm part of this API group called AAPI at Chabot College. And the first thing that I did at one of the meetings was like, all right, y'all, it has to be Asian American and Pacific Islander. You can't just be like having us under like one monolith. Like you have to separate, you have to differentiate, because for the longest time they were just going with this thing, right? Asian Pacific Islander, and there was like no students, no like faculty, and no faculty or staff at Chabot, which they had at Chabot, like participating in that. So that was like one of my first things. So I'm highly aware of my role like within this label, and there's still a necessity to navigate it because I have no choice, right? I have no choice. But the goal is what and the push is what Estella's talking about. Like it's time. It's time for us to be in our own spaces and give room to the most marginalized, which is our Melanesian and Micronesian communities.
Yeah, thank you so much, both of you, for your answers, and definitely agree in very crucial points. And so I'm gonna go into our next question. But as Pacific Islanders, our ancestors were resourceful and worked in community. How can educators invested in Pacific youth education tap into community resources here in the Bay Area?
Okay, I mean let's go. Yeah. So like I think the beautiful thing that you need to know about like Pacific studies like is its discipline like birth like at University of Hawaii, right? Well established at University of Hawaii Manoa, and many different universities like in places like Australia and New Zealand, right? They're very prestige, right? Have these like amazing content, right, that they cover. But the really cool thing about like Pacific studies, specifically in the Bay Area, is it's directly connected to the 1968, 1969 like student strike, right? It is a collective of students, of PI students, getting co-signed from the PI community saying, we want to see ourselves like within higher ed. We want to see courses that reflect our experiences. We want to learn about who we are within higher ed. And and so I say that to say that there are growing courses at the community college level, because that's predominantly where our communities exist. So there is a learning community called MANA at the College of San Mateo, right, where they have a Pacific Studies course, Intro to Pacific Studies course, and a Pacific Studies course focused on the arts in ethnic studies, right? There is, I'm a product of the Critical Pacific Islander and Oceania Studies program at City College of San Francisco. And that was my first exposure to a PI professor, and it's like it's almost 20 years like in supporting, and they also have a learning community called VASA, right? They have 2 tenure-track professors at San Francisco State University, Dr. Leora Kava, Dr. Ponipate Rokakutu, that are they help create a minor in critical Pacific Islands and Oceania studies. So that's like if you want to get tapped in and know like what's like how to gain access to it. There's a plethora of scholars at the community college level doing this work, including myself at Chabot College as well. So like, just, folks want to like know who those people are. Like, I will create a list and you just hit them up, because we're still at the grassroots level where we're like, well, yeah, we want the support, and we love when people want to support us. So if you show interest in supporting our community at the high school, at the K through 12 level, then we're a fan of that too. You know what I'm saying? We want to see you grow, because we're in the process of growing our programs at the community college level. So I would say tap in with us at the community college level and at SF State, because we're making moves.
I'll add to that is the Bay Area is so fortunate to have all of the community leaders that we have. Like, so many of our elders, our aunties that, as a leader at EPIC, I must check in with on a regular basis, are based here in the Bay. We have the SCDC, Samoan Community Development Center, and there are a ton of other orgs and programs that have been birthed from SCDC. We have the Pacific Islander Regional Task Force here in the Bay that's led by Auntie Tao, and she is working hard to make research, the data we need to support some of our community's health needs accessible. But Angel has had students from the PI initiative work in those spaces as well, and continue to support community. And there are just over the Bay, I will point to some K-12 examples. SF Unified was able to pass a resolution in 2020 that pushed them to recount the number of students in the district, and found that there were actually 3 times more PI students in their K-12 system than they had originally thought, probably because, like I said earlier, more than half of us are mixed. And so if we're being forced to check a box, story of my childhood, being forced to check a box, I'm showing up in one set of data and not the other. But there's now a Samoan dual immersion language program in the Bay at a K-12 school. That does not exist anywhere else. I have not found that anywhere else in this country. And there are whole PI youth development programs. There's a tongue and language program here in the Bay. There is Pi Fest, which is a whole PI STEAM family affair, all geared towards getting our young folks into engineering and the arts. There's Camp Unity here, providing all kinds of programming, and that's led by Auntie Mama Fo, who is an elected official out here in the Bay. So the Bay is, like, when I think about so many blueprints and examples of ways to do this everywhere else where our people are, there are so many solid blueprints that have existed in the Bay for decades now that we can point to and go, yeah, auntie over there did it, uncle over there did it. I can go reproduce this in my town somewhere else.
I also want to add the shout out to Taulama and the Pacific Islander Wellness Initiative, which are 2 programs that are focused on mental health in our communities. And so, like, folks who live alongside the peninsula or live in the East Bay, specifically Alameda County, they can gain access to a therapist, right? Shout out to my brother, who's actually one of those therapists that folks can reach out to. So yeah,
that Jason for now.
Yeah.
Also, health in mental health is with San Francisco Unified, but also is one of the founders and leaders of BPA, Black Pasifika Alliance, alongside his cousin, Savali Courtney Andrews, who is also a professor at Oberlin College in Ohio. So, like, I know it's a running joke, but, like, we're all connected in some way. And so there's a way to get the resources. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't say EPIC. We offer Pilot, which is Pacific Islander Leaders of Tomorrow. And we have been so lucky to be partnered with Cal and with UC Davis for the last few years. And we'll continue to partner with Cal whenever possible with the PI initiative to bring our program, our summer institute, to our young PI undergrads, and we have 2 pilot alum as well. We got 3 pilot alum on this panel right now. So yeah.
Thank you so much for that. On the same similar note, as Indigenous peoples, certain Pasifika concepts and understandings are not fully comprehensible by Western frameworks. How can educators ensure that PI studies are being taught in alignment with Pasifika epistemologies and ways of knowing? And similarly, how can we honor the work done by Pasifika scholars who have laid the groundwork like Teresa Teiwa?
I think you mentioned it right there. That's the first article that students read, huh?
Yes.
That's the first article that students read in my class. Teresa Teiwa was the classroom as a metaphor. Yeah.
It's the first article we read in pilot.
Yeah. And the reality in a nutshell, like Teiwa says, like there's no way that we can replicate what our ancestors did, you know what I'm saying, back in the bottom or the ocean, you know, in the islands and all that stuff like that. But it shouldn't deter you from trying, right? So that's the essence of what I get from our article. And she talks about like there's formal and informal ways of how you go about doing that. And I know like from like my experience like taking Dr. Polita's class, and he was in pursuit of his doctor at the time. So he was like what's the term for his adjunct faculty at City College, and him just being a Samoan man, and he was built like he had like a broad shoulders and all that stuff like that. And within my when I was growing up, I literally like thought my body was gonna get me places, right? Them constantly since I was like 12 years old. Oh, you're so big, man! You're made to destroy people on the field. And here is this guy, right? That has the same frame like me, where I'm assuming like he's the football coach, or like he's a Division I player, and he's telling me that he's getting his doctorates at Cal, right? You know what I'm saying? Like that changed my life. It put me on a different trajectory of where I thought my life was gonna be. You know what I'm saying? So like going back to Te'awa's like article talking about informal and formal ways, it's like literally the representation. It's the modeling for me to see a person that looks like me in a different role that defied like what I thought I should have been in that moment, right? And then the way I evolved it, like within the work that I do as an instructor, is taking like the time to know where my students are coming from, to know their names, right? Their cultural names, right? Their preferred names, right? Their pronouns, whether they exist within the binary or beyond the binary. Those are all pivotal things that you have to do to make your students feel seen, right? And it's really just asking them and letting them lead and telling them who they are for the most part. I'll leave right there.
And that what you just said, that's just good teaching, right? Like that's just good teaching. Something else that article says, and I'm gonna paraphrase it because I don't want to misquote her, but she says something to the effect of like, there is no one brush to paint our entire community, or there's no one way to paint our entire community. She also talks about how none of us can ever be an expert in Pacific Islander studies. How the hell are you going to be an expert on 25,000 islands? Like, there's just no way you're going to be an expert on all of those islands. And she talks about the way I interpreted it was sort of as an educator, and it took me a very long time to learn this as an educator. Like, there's some grace that you have to give yourself, knowing that there's only so much you can be an expert in, like with regard to your content, and you will every day do your best to show up, care for, love on the kids or the students that are in your space. And that's like 80% of the battle, right? And then any extra time I have, as if it's abundant, I'm going to go and find all of the extra resources that I can bring into the classroom to support, to supplement, to, like I'm gonna bring SCDC into my classroom. And matter of fact, last year I was in the classroom, the artist, there's another artist in our community a lot of folks are familiar with. His name's JP. And my last year in the classroom, JP was in my room teaching my theater design students about traditional Samoan print. You would think, what the hell does that have to do with teaching theater design? And maybe nothing to some, but for me, it was not only affirming for me, but it was affirming for other API students who were in my space that had never even thought that it would be relevant in their theater design class, right? And I was here last night visiting one of my students who will be graduating from Cal in May, one of my old theater students, and I'm watching their performance here last night and looking at their costumes, and what that student had chosen to do as a double major in ethnic studies and theater was make sure that indigenous practices and cultures shine through in those costume designs, right? And that's just one possibility of what it could look like when a young person is just exposed to as much of it as possible, to what it is they're interested in. But I think the most important part is whoever is in front of you, whatever students are in front of you, you're making sure that you're providing sliding doors, windows, and mirrors, right? Like that they can see themselves reflected, see through, and see to others. And it's really important that, like, for our communities, that even if there are no PI students in your class, like, it's important that it's included, that they know the Pacific is there, that it is the largest body of water on this planet, and that we are here, we exist.
And not to mention, we live in the Bay Area, so we're here. You know what I'm saying? So if they're not in your classroom, 9 times out of 10, somebody knows somebody like from the neighborhood that's like Tongan or Samoan or Chamorro or from Palau. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's, yeah.
Thank you. I'm gonna move on to the next question. Sorry, that sounded really superficial, but I actually mean thank you. Sorry, I'm not fake, I promise. But as a Pacific Islander ethnic studies major, I've struggled in the past with the lack of resources, and even support when it came to researching topics that pertain to Pacific Islander studies. So, how can educators work to fill such gaps?
So I was actually a Black Studies major. One, because I do identify as Black, but also I didn't have, in our department where I was at, it was all East Asian. But one of the methodologies that I was trained in was around oral narratives, histories, which very much aligned with West African culture and practice, but also as I continue to find out more about who I am as Pasifika, also very much aligned with who I am as Pasifika. I don't remember how old I was or where I was. There was a moment where I was like, of course I'm a theater major and a theater teacher. My ancestors are orators on both sides. Like, of course I was going to be a storyteller. It just makes sense. And so the method or my research has been heavily rooted and devoted to capturing oral narratives and histories and stories of elders, of community leaders, of the folks that often get left out of our history books. And in my work at EPIC, it continues. Like, the data will never fully capture who we are, what we're going through. We're always going to get the little asterisk that says the sample size was too small, therefore we cannot include your community. And in those cases, in every case, our narratives become even more important as data points, right? And so it's capturing the lived experiences of our families, of the folks who came before us in the roles. It's capturing the institutional knowledge of these programs that our communities have been able to grow from their living rooms, from their local parks, and documenting those. It's even in documenting the models that already exist, right? So other folks can replicate in other cities. It's mapping out where we are and who we are, like for ourselves and on our own terms, because there's not going to be a LibGuide anytime soon that fully captures what it is, or who we are, where we come from, and what you might be looking towards. And I guess I put the challenge to you. It'll be you creating the LibGuides and giving us the information that the next generation will then be able to reference. The next generation, when my kiddo's in college, she plans on going to MIT. She won't struggle in ethnic studies because she will have had a Fine come before her, and the LibGuide will exist when she gets there.
I mean, in addition to that, like it's I'll tell you like my so like in terms of like sources, like the go-to is like guaranteed like UH, right, and then like all the different like universities that are well established, like University of Auckland, ANU in Australia, you know what I'm saying, like even Victoria University in Wellington, like these are all pristine universities that have a plethora of like studies that you can gather from those institutions, right, to like get articles from for surely, right. But the tough work that you got to do is like that's their stories, like in that diaspora, like all the way across the ocean, like it's really the knowledge of diasporic experiences like in the United States is still coming to fruition, right? You know what I'm saying? So it's really on you to like own that like like just like what Estella's saying, you gotta own that, like you're the one creating it. And like I dealt with this like in my in pursuing my master's too. They were like when I had to form my committee, they were like, oh, there's no scholar like here at this university that like can help you with like your specific topic. But I was like, who helped the first people that created the you know what I'm saying? Like, so there's always gonna be a place of like where new knowledge has to be created. And you gotta own the fact that like you're gonna be the one creating it, and it's your job to like one, get like, you know what I'm saying, get like the professors like that you rock with like on your side to co-sign, like, you know, like Fina's creating like new stuff, you know what I'm saying? I gotta support her, and I gotta help her like navigate the institution, because the institution is always gonna try to find ways to say no. You know what I'm saying? Even though like you know from your experience that it's so important for you to get this off, right? It's so important for you to get this off. And that's why it was really important to my lived experience. Like growing up in San Francisco, it was common for folks who graduated in San Francisco to go to City College in San Francisco and play football over there. And then what I noticed, like within my experience over there, was we had hella Pacific Islander men doing that, but they were like dropping out exponentially, and nobody knew why. And I was like, I know why. I was hanging out with them. You know what I'm saying? Like, and I think I found myself working at the community college, and they were still having the same experiences.
Yeah.
So it was like, okay, I'm working with this community that's still struggling in higher education. What's the significance of, or how do I help support them? Well, I got to create research that names that there's an issue there. You know what I'm saying? That says that there's an issue here. And I had like folks on my committee that was like, oh yeah, for sure, I got you. You know, and then that's just how you do it. That's how I did it. But you're always gonna, when you're creating new knowledge, like they're always gonna try to the institution's always gonna try to figure out ways to tell you no, but you always gotta push against it.
Thank you. Our next question for y'all is, how do the histories and ongoing issues of climate change, environmental degradation, and resource extraction disproportionately affect Pasifika communities, and how can teachers incorporate these realities into their classroom?
It's a reality that we're living right now. It's just we live in the comfort of not seeing it and feeling it, right? But our communities that still live in the VA, they're in the trenches, right? You know what I'm saying? Like my dad's dad, biological dad, is from Tokelau, right? And Tokelau is like an atoll, an atoll of islands, right? That it's up there with it's not gonna be here in like 50 years. It's not gonna be here in like 50 years. And I just met my Tokelauan family in New Zealand, and that's crazy to me. You know, my only connection to the land is like my community that I met in the diaspora, and to feel like I won't have access to like the land, right, or where it exists in the law, like it's heartbreaking, right? And we have to acknowledge that it's part of like the machine, the capitalistic system, right, that tells us to just like make profit, like, and sacrifice anything and everything. And in this case, like our planet, you know what I'm saying? So we're in the trenches as a community. We're in the trenches as a community, especially like our families that still exist in the VA. And when I say the VA, I mean the Pacific, the Oceania.
Yeah, that poem I mentioned earlier, Atlas, great piece to share in your classes. There's another video clip of a young Pasifika climate warrior named Brianna Fruane, and Coconet TV is a resource where you can find short clips that you could use in your classes. But that video, the first time I saw that video, I was 30, taking a Samoan language class for the first time, struggling. And my Viola, my professor, he played that video, he started class with that video, and it's a 3-minute clip, and I was like boo-hoo crying, because she was pointing, her family is also from Samoa, village close to where my family is from, and she talks about how the land is us. Like, for many of our Pasifika cultures, land is living, land is a relative. And for many of our cultures, our relatives once gone return to the land, to our family's lands. And with sea levels rising and erosion, like Drew was talking about, there are parts of her family's, her village, their land, where she's literally losing her relatives as the plots where they were buried are eroding to sea level. And I have never been to Samoa. My mother came here, was given up for adoption, and is now in her 50s and has never been returned home. And when I saw that video, I'm 35 now, and when I saw that video, I was like, oh yeah, I'm never gonna see it. Like that was, and I was like, if I'm never gonna see it, mom's never gonna go back. And if mom's never gonna go back, my brothers will never get to go home. Like, it was just a pool of emotions, thinking about 7 generations back and 7 generations forward. I'm not gonna cry right now. But it's like really, it's hard to sit with that and know that we're so fortunate and removed. Like, we don't have to see it, we don't have to feel it every day. And so we just don't think about it all the time, but it's like, it's really real for many of us. Well, we may never get to see home. We may never ever get to touch. Thank you. We'll never get to touch down on that land. I am so ridiculously lucky because I leave for 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, I leave for Samoa. And I was like hell bent. I was like, Mom, don't give me another excuse. We are going next year. Like, I don't know how much time we got left. And so we're finally gonna get to go. And I pray, I hope, I wish that every Pasifika person in diaspora has that chance. But it's very real for some of our folks already. It's already not a possibility, with many of our islands being exposed to nuclear waste, many of our islands already being damaged beyond repair, that our folks are here as climate refugees. That's a growing population amongst our folks here in diaspora. And that boggles my brain to think about, that the US and other empires can destroy our homelands and then refuse refuge. And there's no safe place for many of our folks to be. And if we do arrive here, no refuge, like, because we don't have the resources or spaces that we need for our folks to thrive in the ways that we are accustomed to. So yeah.
Thank you for that answer, and I know that was really heavy, so thank you for your vulnerability. It's very much appreciated, and definitely feel that. So the next question is, if you could emphasize one thing about teaching Pacific Islander studies in high schools, what would it be?
As a high school teacher, I'm gonna tell other high school teachers, you're always gonna feel overwhelmed, right? Like you cannot teach it all in a school year. You're never gonna get to all the standards. Like it's all ridiculous. It's all set up in a way that we are not as successful as we can be. And so the grace to self is so super, super, super important. And I say that especially amongst a growing shortage of educators in K-12 spaces, because I know it's not easy to stay. So asking you to do something else feels like a heavier burden. I say you get in where you fit in and you do the most that you can. And you teach whatever your content areas are via ethnic studies. You embed it in ways that are clever and creative, right? Like you could do an entire lesson. It's not really Pacific Islander related, but there's a lesson I remember watching a math teacher deliver. It was on Wangari Maathai. It was a math lesson, but it was about deforestation and her work to rebuild forests across Africa. And I saw another math teacher teach about fair trade and chocolates. And again, it was a math lesson. Like there are so many creative ways to get at ethnic studies in general that, you could bring into your class. Like I mentioned earlier, teaching traditional Samoan Tatao print to help teach costume design in my theater courses. One of my favorite plays to teach is Zoot Suit, because as a theater geek, that was the first time I saw brown people on stage. And I fell in love with that show immediately. And Zoot Suit, it opens up with this song by Duke Ellington, Perdido. So you have this Black jazz musician singing a song in Spanish, opening up this show that also talks about a real historical event in East LA around the Zoot Suit riots during the war, and these young Chicano men who were wrongly accused and put on trial. And then there's all these other fantastical things, but me being a teacher in LA, teaching that play was a way for me to get at solidarity between Black and Chicano communities. It was a way to teach about Japanese internment in that region because it hints at it. It was a way to bring in jazz and talk about where our school was. Students didn't know that was historically the jazz corridor of LA. And it was the jazz corridor because Black people couldn't rent hotels or rent houses on the other side of Central Avenue. That's why we are South Central, right? Like that's how we got the name, right? Like it was that one play. It wasn't into to so many different topics that the kids were like, that happened in our neighborhood? Yeah, that happened in our neighborhood. Even teaching about the zoot suit itself, how fashion could be an act of rebellion, how one community, a Chicano community in East LA, took the zoot suit from Black jazz artists inspired by a guy, Cab Calloway, right? Like, those are communities of color linking arms and using art and other expressive ways to rebel, to defend their communities. But I was just teaching zoot suit, right? Like, and that's it. I was just teaching zoot suit. Like, there are so many creative ways that you can bring in all these threads to provide those windows, those sliding doors, those mirrors, so that kiddos can see themselves reflected in their peers. They can find shared history, and not only love on themselves more, love themselves deeply, but love each other more deeply. I'm gonna get more and more. I miss high schoolers. So I guess the long of it is, it will always feel impossible to do it all. You cannot do it all, but you can find ways to get creative and mix it into your content areas that you already teach.
And just to share a couple of assignments, like I'm thinking about like when I was in high school, and I feel like super fortunate, like of the different assignments, like where teachers didn't necessarily were like it's like the banking system, like they like led the discussion on a particular community. They had assignments where like we were the facilitators, and we had control and agency over like what stories we were going to be able to tell. So I just remember 10th grade interviewing my cousin who was from doing an oral history project, right? Interviewing my cousin who was from the island of Manua, specifically Ofu, and talking about his migration story to America, right? So that's like one example of like, giving tools to the student to be able to tell their stories, right? Another example that's used at the high school level, but I still use it in my classes. Shout out to the Pinoy Panay Educational Partnerships, Dr. Allison Titiano Cabalas. She's been my author for like, she knew me since I was like 12.
She's one of my heroes too.
Right. And she like that group like focuses on ethnic studies from a Filipino lens, right? And they always have like a cohort of Filipino, but also open to other communities that are interested in teaching at the high school level. And then like within these cohorts, they teach ethnic studies, but because like they're hungry, they're thriving, right? They want to teach more. They create these new assignments, and one of the assignments that my partner and I have like kind of like evolved into like our own thing to centralize Pacific allergists is this thing called the soundtrack of life, right? Mm-hmm. So you pick 3 songs, right? You let a student pick 3 songs that define their past, present, and future. Right? So you give them the tools, right? And you give them, and the tool being music. Like what kid, right? What 15-year-old doesn't want to talk about music, right? Mm-hmm. And connect it to like their lived experience in the moment. And that's something that works in high school, and that's something that I use in FINA. FINA even did the assignment like when she was a part of my class. It's a way to like. You don't carry the burden of having to teach an accurate like perception of like Pacific communities. Like you're giving it to the student to tell me about it. You know what I'm saying? So those are like different ways so thinking of innovative ways to help students bring themselves into and that's like the first big assignment that we do in the class, because it's like how can I bring you into this class and teach you about something that I care about without acknowledging that you come to this space with knowledge through your lived experience. You know? So
yeah, that lesson is super impactful because I've experienced it myself in several different ways in programs. UCLA peer program uses it. EPIC, we've used that lesson a few times too with pilots. Yeah, that PEP is another resource.
Shout out to Pep.
In the Bay, another resource.
Shout out to Rod and all.
So, sorry, the last question before we want to leave some space for Q&A. So, I'm gonna ask it, but also ask for just also time for the Q&A. And I think we have about 13 minutes left. But the last question is, considering the legacy of and the long-standing struggle for ethnic studies, including the recent and ongoing attacks on ethnic studies, critical race theory, and DEI-related work, this work can be quite difficult, to say the least. Thinking about Marame's Kaba's hope as a discipline, how do you stay engaged and hopeful in this field? What is the future of PI/ethnic studies? Sorry, that was comfortable.
I mean, I'm sitting in this panel discussion, and you getting your BA in ethnic studies,
Right?
Like when
that was my
like,
answer too, bro.
yeah, like I taught the class that you were in. That was the first class that I ever taught in ethnic studies as a teacher. So it's you know, man, like yeah, like now I'm not trying to get emotional too, you know, like, but like it's literally like you as an instructor, like I know how lonely I was at the institution, like as a student, right? And I know how I didn't feel like seen, and like was just hungry to be like just acknowledge my experience and all that stuff like that. So I carry that as an instructor, right? And so so my effort in trying to connect is like 100%, right? And like 20 times out of 20 times in trying to connect with students, like they just give me the cold shoulder, you know what I'm saying? Like nobody comes to office hours, you know what I'm saying? Like all that stuff, you know what I'm saying? So it's like you endure all that stuff like that to get these like little victories, you know what I'm saying? Of a Kahel and Fien like getting their, pursuing ethnic studies. That's what I do it for, you know what I'm saying? Like that's the pick me up, you know what I'm saying? Like because it just makes you feel like it's like affirming to know like that all your efforts didn't go in vain, and like the and especially the students that you hold in high regard, like it's like I hear you, you know what I'm saying? So that's yes, thank you.
The attacks on ethnic studies is wild, out of control, not okay. And I know that Allison, one of them, who is dealing with these are loved educators, colleagues, mentors that are going through things they shouldn't have to deal with right now. The piece that Angel created, it's a case against UTLA and liberated ethnic studies, and my Chicano studies professor is named in that suit. My bestie from the last site I worked at is named in that suit. My former union president is named in that suit. And these are all women of color who every day are showing up front lines teaching in higher ed or in the union doing the work and in K-12 classrooms doing the work. And it breaks my heart. And so I do my best to show up as best as I can for them. And whatever resource I have, it is yours to make it through another semester, another quarter, another school year. And I say this as someone who had to leave the classroom. It was not safe anymore for me to be a K-12 educator, and I had to go for my safety, to survive, literally to survive. And there are many educators who are feeling that and are feeling like they need to leave. And I am not here to gaslight and tell you, stay in it. You do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And you do the best that you can. And I guess I want to say, even if you are not in a classroom next semester, next school year, there are still a million ways you show up for community, you support ethnic studies, you support your students, and other places, other adjacent spaces where I found my home now is at EPIC because it is an adjacent space that I get to continue to advocate for ethnic studies. I get to continue to support Pasifika youth and support and make space for Pasifika youth to thrive. And so I just wanted to say, I know it is ridiculously hard right now, and it's not fair. And whatever resource I can help make available, I will help make available.
Oh, thank you so much for all of your answers. We really appreciate it. So I guess we have about 8 minutes left. So want to leave it up to a Q&A in case folks here or on Zoom have any questions that they want to ask our panelists.
There are some questions in Zoom, if nobody else. Okay. One of the questions, apologies in advance if I get the pronunciation wrong, says, Lorena, hello in Rapa Nui. I met Yo-Yo Bakumio on the island of Rapa Nui, Easter Island, and he asked me, what strategies can your educators implement to ensure a comprehensive and culturally sensitive approach to teaching Rapa Nui culture, history, and the ongoing struggle for independence, considering the complex intersections of colonial history, indigenous rights, and contemporary geopolitical dynamics?
I would say because that subject matter is foreign to me, and it goes back to kind of the Te'awa lesson on nobody can be an expert in the Pacific. So I'm sorry I can't give you the ideal answer, but it also goes back to kind of the journey that FINA's on. There's no content out there, you know what I'm saying, to kind of define what it is. So it's really at the grassroots level, who are you connected to, and what kind of research are you, what kind of research can you gain access to and build off of, you know what I'm saying? Because that's a topic that's very specific, you know what I'm saying? And I'm a little stunned if I'm being honest.
The one thing I couldn't add or say is there I would hope or want for a concerted effort, whether it's in institutions, orgs like EPIC, community-based orgs, to recruit and support young folks from those island nations to make sure that they are finding their ways from those 2-year schools into 4-year schools, or higher ed may not be for them, but find the support that those young folks need to then share their lived experiences with others.
I can take one on behalf of a teacher. On behalf of a teacher named Christy Emmons, in our high school class, the curriculum focuses on themes like solidarity and activism. What do the Pacific Islander communities that you represent want students to know about these?
Again, huge topics, because there's so many different islands. Pick an island, and we can tell a different story about solidarity.
I think it's the ones that you specifically sort of
Okay. The one that's always near and dear to my heart, actually, is the story of the Polynesian Panthers. Because for me, it connects two sides of myself. Even though I am not of New Zealand ancestry or diaspora, hearing stories about the birth of the Polynesian Panthers, having been inspired by the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, born here in Oakland, and Black Power being such a big part of my research area, that's a story of solidarity and action that always, it's one that's near and dear to my heart. And there's a book, it's a pretty I'd say it's a good K-12. Well, it's a good middle to high school text called The Polynesian Panthers that gives a nice photo history and brief overview of the founding of the Polynesian Panthers.
Yeah, the Coconet has mini documentaries that they focus on Polynesian Panthers, focused on the dawn raids that happened in New Zealand. Another one that stands out to me is the Mau movement, right? Mau movement in Samoa is a peaceful protest that's happening in the island of Samoa that predates Gandhi and MLK, right? Where it's a collective of Samoans that want to push for independent Samoa against a colonial regime in the form of New Zealand, right? New Zealand being an occupier in Samoa. So that's another really cool social movement. One of the current ones, right, that coincide with the current genocide that's happening in Palestine is the genocide of the current genocide that's happening in West Papua. You know what I mean? And so creating awareness of something like that. A cool documentary is you can watch is Benny Wenda, The Journey Home, right? It focuses on Benny Wenda, who's a Papuan activist, right? He was exiled. I think he escaped. The occupation by the Indonesian government, and is one of the main reasons why we know about what's going on in West Papua, because he's been a long-standing activist. Right? So there's just a couple of stuff that we, to discuss and try to bring up, and there's content out there to cover and address.
There's another question on Zoom. Oh, there's also a thank you for responding to that question to everyone on the panel. How important is professional development and/or ethnic studies endorsement teaching ethnic studies with integrity?
Oh, it's so super important. So one of my biggest pet peeves is school districts and state legislatures passing policy calling it ethnic studies when it is not. It is multicultural education. It is maybe a potluck and a cultural day. It is not ethnic studies. And I take real issue with folks watering down curriculum and passing it off as ethnic studies when ethnic studies, like cited earlier on this panel, was a hard fought for discipline by folks here in the Bay and across many other higher ed institutions with tenets and philosophy. It has a structure. It is a discipline as any other discipline on a higher ed campus, and just the disrespect to call other things ethnic studies, it's really problematic. And the way it's showing up now, actually, it really worries me, because legislation keeps passing for API histories that are claiming to be ethnic studies when they're barely API histories. They're just sort of kind of Asian history, and they're not even fully Asian history, but it doesn't actually get to the root of what ethnic studies is about. And so there are some folks out there that you can turn to for professional development. Liberated Ethnic Studies is one, PEP is another, and there are several other groups and cohorts, this cluster here, where real ethnic studies resources are being provided. And again, if you need some professional development, I can point to some events, upcoming events.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much, Drew and Estella, for taking time out of your day to drop in some knowledge and wisdom for our ethnic studies Bay Area teachers. But can we get a round of applause?
Thank you.